Careful.
So this says I should unmute myself. 1, 2, 3.
No,
No.
you're going to be speaking through 2 other.
I understand, but
Okay.
what we really want to acknowledge is these 2 wizards here.
We will, and you may now, right now.
I am.
Don't mind the smoke coming out of the top.
2 more minutes. No, only if you need that. Yes.
I just hung up on my hearing. That's curious. That's curious.
Yes.
Yeah.
But you're having trouble fixing
Good evening. For those who may not know me, I'm Mary Holt, current president of the Big Island Historical Society. Welcome and thank you for joining us in person or in Zoom for the Historical Society's Ellsworth Miller Memorial Lecture Series established by Cap Leonard. The Board of Trustees offers sincere thanks to Cap for his continued generous support of the lecture series. Sincere thanks also to the Shebig Community Church for making their lovely space available to our organization. Also worthy of great appreciation are our technology crew members. Richard Hackle, our current technology lead, and John Holt, ever present for everything assistant. Before commencing with the lecture, I wish to acknowledge and honor the indigenous people who were first to inhabit Shebig, forage its fields and forests, and fish its waters. You will find in the back of the church, if you are here with us in person, a donation jar if you wish to support the efforts of the Historical Society. Also, the Historical Society's redemption assignments begin Wednesday, and we'd welcome help on Saturday or Sunday if you have time and are able to participate. Please sign up for a shift on the schedule found on the lighted shelf to the right of the exit. Another note, Monday, July 25th, we will be hosting a lecture at the Island Hall along with Maine Humanities. And it will be Pam Cummings, Director, President of the Abyssinian Meeting House in Portland, and she'll be speaking on the Underground Railroad in Maine. Hope to see you all there or zoomed in. Let's see, at the start of the lecture, you will be asked to share your comments, not quite at the very beginning, somewhere around the 6th slide, regarding the photograph of ship Casco featured in our postings. What?
Never mind.
Please save your questions relative to the lecture. They will be addressed following the lecture. Those zooming in are asked to type their ship comments and lecture questions in the chat box and select to everyone. And that way you'll be able to review the questions, not repeat something that someone else has already typed into the chat box. Tonight's lecture, Maritime Anecdotes of Casco Bay, will be delivered by Erno Bonebakker, who 1 year ago presented World War II Casco Bay facts, myths, images, and anecdotes. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Erno. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary, for that lovely introduction. And thank you to the Chesapeake Island Historical Society for inviting me back for another talk. This year's talk focuses on a few more Chesapeake connections to World War II and supplements my overview from last year. It's been gratifying to get feedback over the past year. It's also been fun to discover new images and stories to share with you. I, in turn, want to acknowledge Jim Millinger, who grew up and lived for many years on Chesapeake Island, who I consider a friend, historian, and a mentor. It happens that we live in his mother's cottage where he grew up. I'm going to start by setting the scene in Casco Bay during World War II, and then share a few stories. These are anecdotes and tidbits, updates. Tonight is going to be not the same comprehensive overview that I presented last year. But if you want to see last year's talk and get the overview, go to the Chesapeake Island Historical Society's website where you can view it and all the other talks. Next, please. No, back. There we go. Thank you. First, to review I'll speak up.
Yeah, that'll be good. Good. What's speaking to the microphone?
I've got two microphones.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just speak up a little more. Why was Casco Bay significant in World War II beyond simply being Chesapeake's backyard? As you see on the slide, it was the easternmost port and naval anchorage in the continental US. It had a shipyard that built 266 cargo vessels, Liberty ships, to contribute to the bridge of ships that carried the supplies that carried the war to our enemies. It also was a center for the US Navy's convoy escorts, destroyers and smaller ships that escorted the convoys, protected them from submarines and aircraft attack. That effort was based in what was called the Commander Destroyers Atlantic, or Comdes Lant, which was located on a destroyer tender in Casco Bay. finally, it was a fortified harbor, one of about 20 in the continental US, which was a joint effort of both the Army Coast Defense Corps and the Navy's local defense effort. But it was not, and I heard one of these mistruths this morning on the Bay lines, it was not the headquarters of the US Atlantic Fleet. The Atlantic Fleet headquarters was on a flagship, which early in the war was a battleship or a destroyer or a cruiser, but later in the war, there was a recognition that warships were more useful fighting the enemy than carrying admirals around. And the admiral in command of the Atlantic Fleet was based on a converted yacht, which was effectively a floating office, and he went where the work was. The other common misconception is that Casco Bay was a convoy assembly point. I'm sure part of this is based on people saying there were a lot of ships in Casco Bay, so it must have been convoys assembling. The convoys assembled either in the major harbors where they loaded and unloaded, or in jumping off points. Convoy assembly points for the North Atlantic were north to south, Sydney, Nova Scotia, Halifax, New York City, and Norfolk, Virginia. Which were, as to Nova Scotia, jumping off points to go to the UK, and in the other cases, the great harbors where a sufficient number of ships would assemble to send convoys directly. Next, please. What were the defenses in Casco Bay? This image shows the fixed defenses working from right to left, offshore to inshore, the detection loops offshore, the hydrophones, Army and Navy minefields, and ultimately obstructions and nets, which closed the bay, the entrances to the bay from unauthorized vessels. I want to point out the red net between Deer Point and Long Island, and the black net at the top between Bar Point and Littlejohn. We'll hear more about those shortly. Next, please. Next. This, don't even try to read this. What this shows are the Army coast defense elements of the harbor defenses of Casco Bay, which extended from Cape Porpoise all the way to the mouth of the Kennebec. They were really complex. That's the takeaway from that image. Next, please. Going back to the convoy routes, this shows how feeder convoys fed to and from the major jumping off points: New York, Halifax, Sydney, and not shown here is from Norfolk in the middle of the map, where the convoys, the Norfolk convoys went to and from Gibraltar in the Mediterranean. Next. Here is the puzzler. And Mary, thank you for spilling the beans. The question is, what are the two connections of this ship with Casco Bay. And now if you're on Zoom, put your comment in, your answers. Raise your hand if you have an idea of what the two connections are. And there are a few people in the audience that are not allowed to say anything. And I'm not sure whether I'll disqualify CAP, but because as the sponsor, tell us what the two connections are.
I believe that's the Casco.
Named for Casco Bay.
Hopefully.
And well, that's what the sources say. And what's the other connection?
Admiral Willis Cleves was her CO at the time. She was torpedoed.
As a local Shebig, son of Shebig, and descendant of stone sloop captains, at the time he was a mere commander, because this was not all that big ship in this scale of things. But what this shows, this picture shows the seaplane tender Casco right after she was hit by a Japanese torpedo, and you can see the hole in the middle of the ship, the side of the ship. It was 12 feet high and 28 feet wide. And she was in Nazan Bay on the island of Atka in Alaska. So first, who was Willis Cleves? He was born in 1902 on Shebig. He was, as I said, a descendant of stone sloop captains, grew up on Shebig, graduated from Portland High School in 1920 and from the Naval Academy in 1924. He became a naval aviator in 1926 and rose through the ranks in the Navy, both as an aviator and as a communications specialist. In February 1942, he took command of a patrol squadron operating Mariner seaplanes from Norfolk and Bermuda. In mid-1942, he was assigned as commanding officer of Casco, based in Alaska, supporting Catalina seaplanes, which were meeting the Japanese advances in the Aleutian Islands. He reported to Casco in Kodiak, Alaska, on August 17th of 1942, and only 13 days later, on the 30th, the torpedo hit, and his great challenge was presented. Next. This is Willis Cleves as a midshipman and as a captain commanding in his next assignment after Casco. And in the middle is a picture of him on the bridge of his final command, which was the escort carrier Palau after the war. Next, please. So why was Casco anchored in a remote Aleutian Bay? This is the history. It's the strategic situation in the North Pacific on the 3rd of June in 1942, which was when the Japanese were advancing simultaneously on the Alaska and the Aleutian chain, and on Midway, where they hoped to deliver a knockout punch to the US fleet. It was a typically complex Japanese battle plan. Because the US had broken the Japanese code, we had an idea what was going on. And at Midway, the Navy succeeded in sinking 3 or 4. I'm getting beyond my text here. Japanese carriers. But the Japanese had planned to occupy Attu all the way at the end of the chain, Kiska and Adak. They launched an air raid on Dutch Harbor, and as a result of the U.S. Army Air Force defending Dutch Harbor. Next slide, please. Here we are. Dutch Harbor is right in the middle. The major naval base in Alaska, in this part of Alaska, was at Kodiak, 750 miles to the northeast. The Air Force had built an air base on Unmac, which is the next one down from Dutch Harbor. And that when American planes appeared to meet the attacking Japanese carrier planes, they were unpleasantly surprised and decided not to occupy Adak and landed only on Attu and Kiska. This theater of operations was really challenging because it featured primitive to no infrastructure, stormy weather, and enormous distances. Kodiak is 750 miles from Dutch Harbor, and in turn, Dutch Harbor is almost 450 miles from Adak, and then several hundred miles further from both Adak and Kiska and Attu. Atka, which is just east of Adak, was where Casco was operating at the outer edge, watching the Japanese and doing their best to harass them. And they were absolutely key to that effort. Next. And Casco was what made it possible. This is a picture of Casco's sister ship, Mackinac, sorry. That this is the best picture I could get of a similar ship. Casco was the third one. They were brand new. Casco had been in service for less than a year. What I want to point out is that there's this great big crane on the after end of the ship, which you'll see again, and we did see before, that looks like it belongs at a construction site on land. And it may well have been a improvised expedient to get the ships out to put them to work. She had 2 5-inch guns, similar to destroyers forward, but only light guns aft. And she has depth charge rails on the stern for attacking submarines. More on that later. These ships were 311 feet long and displaced about 2,700 tons. And hold those thoughts for comparison. Next. What were they doing? They were supporting Catalina seaplanes. And this picture shows refueling a Catalina at anchor in Alaska from the stern of Casco. Looks pretty sketchy, actually, with the, they've got lines keeping the aircraft in and poles pushing the aircraft out, but they made it work. Next, please. This is a shot with some action showing, I'm guessing it was taking off, the Catalina taking off, and in the background is Casco. And you can see that the big construction crane is been replaced by something far more seaman-like. And they've added 2 5-inch guns aft on the ship, doubled the primary armament after the incident in Atka. This is 1943, after she had been repaired. Just to indicate what an advance Casco was over what came before. Next, please. This is the Williamson, who was in Atka at the time. This was a World War I vintage destroyer converted into a seaplane tender. These were long, narrow, miserable ships, 314 feet, but only 3/4 the width and considerably less tonnage. She'd been converted to do the same thing as Casco with far less space and facilities in 1938. And next, please. Even more distressing, this is USS Teal, who was there as well. She's a 1917 vintage minesweeper that was converted in 1919 into a tender. And she's only 187 feet long and 840 tons, barely 1/3 of Casco's size. So Commander Cleaves was really excited when he realized he was going to be the commanding officer of a brand new tender named after his home bay and out at the cutting edge of the war. Next, please. And here we get into the story. On the evening of August 30th of 1942, Casco was anchored in Atka in the lee of Palisades Point and supporting her seaplanes, watching and harassing the Japanese on Kiska and Attu, some 500 miles. Attu is some 500 miles to the west. That day, with an easterly gale blowing, the afternoon had been filled with struggling to keep their seaplanes from dragging anchor in the bay. And just at sunset, 8:30 p.m., the lookout sighted a periscope and the ship went to battle stations. A minute and a half later, already at battle stations, the torpedo detonated on the starboard side, blowing that huge hole in the forward engine room. 5 men were killed and 20 were wounded. Despite the initial loss of all power and light, within 20 minutes, the ship had restored power, slipped the anchor chains, let go both the anchors and the chains, and began maneuvering to avoid further attack. She was limited because they hadn't installed any sound gear to detect submarines. Probably another example of get it out there and damn the consequences. When her port engine overheated at 10 o'clock, she drifted onto the beach, where you can see her here. The rest of the night was occupied with moving wounded and excess men to Atka village that had been evacuated shortly before. Next, please. Oh dear. You can go online, Google Atka village, but it gives you the idea that on a nice day, it's absolutely spectacular sight. But I gather these are very rare. Sorry about that. Next, please. It's wonderful what you can find online. This is a 1943 chart of the bay. The red dot is Palisades Point, which Casco was sheltering behind. And although I don't know for certain, I suspect that she drifted ashore roughly directly west of that spot. And Atka village is located where the blue dot is. The cause of the disaster was the fact that the destroyer that had been patrolling the mouth of the bay for submarines had been dispatched to take VIPs to Adak that day, leaving Casco totally unprotected. Next, please. They did get a little bit of good news the next day. This is, again, sister ship of the Japanese submarine that had been built in 1922, 20 years before, that torpedoed the Casco. The destroyer Reed came into the bay and carrying the message that she had sunk this submarine that day. Next, please. The submarine was sunk north of Atka, which is at the site of the red dot, and the blue dot is the mouth of Nazan Bay. Again, a World War II chart that just comes out of the internet. Next, this is the inside view of the forward engine room. The hole made by the torpedo, the wreckage of the machinery, and in the background, the patch that was put on the temporary patch. This photo was taken after the ship arrived at the shipyard for repairs. The 12 days following the torpedoing, Cleves and his crew worked continuously to refloat Casco. They lightened the ship by pumping 90,000 gallons of gasoline overboard, aircraft fuel, dumped bombs and ammunition. A salvage crew of Seabees and civilian contractors arrived from Dutch Harbor with pumps, jets, welders, and divers. Beams were bolted to the decks. Shoring was placed to strengthen the damaged ship and to close the hole. Jets, which were, I think that they're air pumped through a pipe to stir up the sand that underneath the ship were used, and they had got 3 PT boats to tie up next to the ship to wash the sand under the ship away. All hands sallied ship, which is the technique of getting the whole crew to run from one side to the other to try and rock the ship to get things loose. And they even fired the 5-inch guns to try and jar the ship loose. Finally, on September 12th, she came free. It took her about 5 hours to actually get fully afloat. And the following day, she was under tow, beginning the long trip, first to the Kodiak dry dock for the temporary patch, and then to Puget Sound Naval Shipyard, where she was permanently repaired. In a post-war article, Commander Cleves described an encounter in Puget Sound with what he described was reported as a high-ranking official who asked where he was from. And Cleves replied, "Chebeague Island, Maine." The official responded, "Praise be, you're the first commanding officer I've met who wasn't from Kansas." Cleves, as we saw, was transferred to command the air station in Daytona Beach took the ship back to Alaska and went to Daytona Beach the following summer in August. And then ended up as the commanding officer of the escort carrier Palau after the war. He retired in July of 1946 and then had a long career working with Bendix Radio in Baltimore. The Casco also left Alaska in November of 43 and went to the Central Pacific for the rest of the war. She later was a Coast Guard cutter based in Boston until the late 60s. The Coast Guard loved these ships because they were roomy and they were simple and seaworthy. So at the end of this all, Commander Cleves was awarded the Silver Star for his leadership in salvaging the ship, which is really an extraordinary saga of perseverance and seamanship. We now move on from the story of the Casco to John Moulton, father of Mimi Moulton, which I suspect many of the people here remember. What's remarkable about John is what he reported in the meticulous diary that he kept during his wartime summers at his camp on Deer Point. In 1942, he was a high school math teacher who wasn't paid during the summertime. And he tried to supplement his teacher's salary by harvesting seals from Casco Bay. Is everything still working? Let's go to the next slide. We're finished with that. There's John. That picture was taken in the Portland Observatory, which was the subject of a book he wrote detailing the history. sea moss. Why sea moss? It was a strategic and important, it became a strategic and important product during the war. Next slide. This is a picture of Irish moss. And the reason was, it was sea moss can be refined into carrageenan, which is a gelling agent used in foods, paints, and many other products. Most common one, or the closest to many of us and obvious, is it keeps the chocolate in chocolate milk afloat. Without sea moss, without a gelling agent, chocolate milk would be a little bit of brown on the bottom of the bottle of white. The reason why it became important in World War II is that before the war, the gelling agent used in the United States was derived from agar-agar, or was agar-agar, which was refined from another sea moss, but it was all imported from Japan, and that got cut off. As a result, the sea moss harvesting industry sprang up on the coast of Maine, including on Chesapeake. Ben Thompson, a Portland Admiralty lawyer and a Chesapeake landowner, set up a buying station on Rose's Point for his Irish Sea Moss Company of Maine. Royal Bennett ran that station, and I'm hoping that we can, at the end, maybe learn how Royal Bennett fits into the Bennetts of Chesapeake and the Bennett who offered this table. The station bought both wet and dry moss, and Moulton's diary describes a seemingly endless tale of woe in his effort to make money mossing. It was hard physical work to rake the moss off the low tide ledges, then lug baskets of it up the beach to the buying station. He also tried to dry the moss because there was a premium price for dry moss, but again and again, the rain fell and wet the moss just as he was about to either cover it up or collect it. And to top it all off, he threw his back out at the beginning of the summer, and he struggled, but he kept keeping his diary, and he has lots of wonderful details about life and people on Chesapeake. I wish I had more about sea mossing, but we're now going to move on to an update and an extension of one of last year's stories. Next, please. Some of you may recognize this. It's the Richardson House on the East End, and the bare structure of what is now their garage, but was built as a fire control station for the Army. At the end of last year's lecture, there was feedback from some of the listeners who told a great story about how H.P. Richardson had allegedly confronted the Army and shamed them into giving his property back. Nancy Ernest has advised me that this tale is, to her knowledge, an island legend and not true. Richardson had served in the Army, he had connections, he knew what was happening, and he did get his property back. But the Army had moved his two-story house down off the point to the East End Drive and heated the summer house for 3 winters and rotted out the bottom floor. In 1952, Ellis Snodgrass, who's the man who clearly is an authority in this picture and in the hat, was contracted to move the upper story of the house back up the hill and place it close to where it had been before the war. Turns out there are more connections with Chesapeake and Ellis Snodgrass, which perhaps, as I find, enriches my experience as I am on Chesapeake and on Casco Bay. Next. Snodgrass was quite remarkable. He built a construction company that did an awful lot during the war. He built the West Yard where they built Liberty ships. And for the Navy, he did almost $3 million of work on 46 projects around the bay, including much of the waterfront construction on Long Island and all the obstruction and nets across the various entrances to the bay. The Navy historian of the war states, quote, Snodgrass is to be commended for his active early and late personal push on difficult waterfront work during the heart of a severe winter. And what made it happen was, and continuing the quotation, he had a devoted personal following of Maine individualists, Perrin, lumberjacks, fishermen, etc., when not engaged in heavy waterfront construction. A number of Shebeegers worked for Snodgrass. And last year, next please, we noted that he built the wharf at Chandler's Cove in the fall of 1942. And my understanding is that our Shebeeg's Roy Hill was the foreman on that project. And he fell in the water in the middle of the winter. Another tidbit, which takes us next, please, which takes us back to the Moulton Diary. This is the crib that anchored the Shebeeg end of the net to Long Island at Deer Point. And the August 10, 1945 entry in the diary is, which was actually written by his wife in Moulton's absence, quote, big boat with things sticking out at the end was idling near the crib. A small boat came alongside the boom. A boy with glasses and a torch got off and presumably burned the chain or cables. Then the men in the large boat hauled on a rope, pulled the long chain of wooden platforms with the spikes on them towards them and headed for Portland. Next, please. To interpret the diary entry, it likely was this ship, the net tender Gumtree, which spent the war in Casco Bay and has big things on the end, that cut the boom and towed it to the net depot, which is at what's now the Coast Guard base in South Portland. Next, please. Of more immediate interest today, the crib is long since gone. The iron eye in the ledge is there at Deer Point. It's very hard to find. Of more immediate interest is the Bar Point to Little John obstructions and net. And this shows, I believe this was the application to the Army Corps of Engineers for a permit to construct the obstructions. Bar Point, from Bar Point to where buoy 18 is now, there was were obstructions, and then from the end of the obstructions to the Little John shore, there was a net with a gate across that channel. Next, please. This is the type of obstructions that were on the Bar Point bar. And these are cutters intended to rip open the bottoms of PT boats that might try to attack the ships in the harbor. Moulton's diary notes that Manly Dyer in 1942 was making $25 a day working for Snodgrass. That was $10 a day wages and $15 a day for Manly's boat. Getting to the present, we get the next slide, please. This is buoy 18. You never get on this side of the buoy on the ferry, but you can if you have your own boat. And just to the left of the buoy, you can see in the trees that little structure, and that's the winch house that opened and closed the net gate across the channel. Next, please. Here's a close-up of the house. The soldiers that guarded the net were bivouacked in the house to the left, and they manned a machine gun nest on the point to the right of his. So when you go past on the Chebeague Ferry, remember, this is a vestige of World War II. Still there. Another element post-war, next please. Snodgrass built many bridges in Maine, including the Cousins Island Bridge, which he built in 1955, originally to support the construction of the Cousins Island Power Plant by CMP. But the bridge is now named after Snodgrass as a Snodgrass Memorial Bridge. Next slide. And there's a plaque on the Sandy Point parking lot shown here. You may remember next, if you look at if you were at last year's lecture or have seen the recording, you'll recognize this picture of the ancient battleship Wyoming. And I commented that I'd never found a picture of a big warship underway in Casco Bay. Eureka. Next. This image is courtesy of the Long Island Historical Society and comes from their Mary Quinn Justice collection. Shows Wyoming heading out of the Hussey for her first day of operations as part of Composite Task Force 69, which was a crash effort in the summer of 1945 to develop anti-kamikaze tactics for the planned invasion of Japan in the fall of expected in the fall of 45. Finally, here's some amusing, next please, evidence of improvisation early in the war. This is probably a brand new Army mine planter. And you'll notice that at the bow and the stern, she has Army field artillery pieces bolted to the deck. These are the kinds of things that are more appropriate to the current war in Ukraine, where they'd hide them in hedgerows and shoot at people and tanks across the field. They were hardly designed to be bolted to a ship, presumably to protect them from submarines. So, thank you for listening. They do come next month on August 8th, when Toby Webb will speak on Chebeague and the Battle of the Atlantic and present another tale of adventure involving a Chebeaguer. Thank you for listening, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions. Any questions in the live audience? So Donna.
Yeah, I just have a comment. which I found very interesting. Doug's father was on the Wyoming in Casco Bay. And so I never really understood what they were doing on the Wyoming. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I covered that effort in more detail last year, so.
Yeah.
And the Wyoming was originally built in 1912. And her, the most noted thing that she ended up with is being the first ship that Jimmy Carter was assigned to after he graduated from the Naval Academy. Can you tell us about Royal Bennett?
Yeah. Yeah. Royal Bennett was the brother-in-law of Minnie Bennett, who that is, that altar is dedicated to. And Royal Bennett was born in the house that Mark McGee lives in right now. I think it's ugly. You can hear it.
Help me with Mark McGee.
It's across from the Grange Hall, the little yellow house that's beside Capitol.
Oh, the yellow.
Near Capitol.
Yeah, it's the
So
next
that's where
one.
Royal Bennett was born.
Uh-huh.
And later on, he married Isabel Hamilton and built the house that Gail Williams and her husband have at the East End. And he was, as a young man, he went stone sleuthing.
Uh-huh.
And he later ran a tour boat. He had a couple of different boats that he ran, and one was the Billow. Can't remember what the other one's name is. I can't remember. But he did that for a long time. And so anyway, that's what I know about Royal Bennett.
Well, thank you.
He was the grandfather of like Billy Monroe and also Geneva Bowen.
Geneva, and no connection at all to Joni, who.
Yeah, yes, because Joe's grandfather was Will Bennett, who was a brother of Royal.
Okay. So
He was her grandmother.
got it. Cap.
Just as an aside, at the end of the war, then Captain Cleves had the honor of bringing his escort carrier to Portland, Maine, where it was the subject of much acclaim, and he invited several folks from this island to join him on board while the ship was in port.
That's interesting because I initially understood that was the case, and Barbara, please chime in. Palau came to Portland in 1948 on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the creation of South Portland, and by that point, Captain Cleves had retired, and upon retirement been advanced to the rank of Rear Admiral.
What we know is a pump legislation.
So it wasn't his ship then,
No,
but,
he may have been there.
and I don't know, do you?
Yeah, he was there. I didn't remember.
Did you go aboard with him?
People from Chevy.
He did?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
I
Yeah.
suppose it was just, honored somehow.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Warren Hamilton, who was a local milkman,
yeah,
was invited there. I don't know the date.
yeah, well, it was 48. Any other questions? Any questions from the chat?
No, not one.
Tech Guru? I must have put them all asleep. Thank you. Thank you for putting up with me. I love this stuff. I could talk for another 3 hours. And for a final word.
Simple final word. Thank you very much, Erno. And thank you all for coming out this evening. And thank you all for zooming in. Hope to see you at the next lecture, first July 25th at the hall, and Toby's August 8th here at the church. Thank you. I hope so.
Yeah, I'll
We can
hear
listen to the
her.
recording.
Yeah.